So I just want to introduce myself here. I'm Juan Lizarazo, and I'm an open source contributor to the AMP project. So the AMP project, if you haven't heard about it, is a project led by Google, and the main objective of the project is to make the web faster and more accessible for everyone. So our friends at Google sent us some stickers here. So after the session, please come grab all of them, take them off my hands. If not, I'll have to return them next week. Okay, so yeah, there. So let's start by talking about the Accelerated Mobile Pages project. So there's two things here to differentiate. One thing is the project, and one thing is the technology. So for the project, we have the open source initiative that wants to make the web better for everyone. It is where content creators, advertisers, publishers, news media, developers, and designers come together and work and collaborate to make the web better and faster. We have also the GitHub repository where we have open source contributors, where we have core contributors, we have users using the project, using the technology and reporting issues. We have also the Stack Overflow community in case you have issues, questions, you can always ask there. And my favorite one is the AMP Slack channel. So always you can get help there if you're using the project or if you're contributing and you have some questions about the source code. So this project, this is my favorite part of this. The Accelerated Mobile Pages AMP, this is the technology. And this is a technology that we use to create fast mobile pages. This technology is amazing because it's just a web components library. So because it's just a library, it's really easy to use. And because it is web components, if you know how to use HTML, if you know how to use IMG tag, you know how to use this library because it's just HTML, CSS, and a little tiny bit of JavaScript, but that one has a little gotcha that I'm going to tell you in a little bit about. But yeah, so it's really easy to use. So using AMP sites, maybe you haven't heard about AMP, maybe this is the first time, but I'm pretty sure that all of you have used sites built with AMP. So if we see here, I just Google for weather and then for international news, and I got these top stories results, I got these results there. And if you notice, there's these tiny icons there that have the logo I have here on my shirt, is the AMP logo. This means that this is powered by the technology. So when you use the technology, it will show up there, and that means to the user that your site is accelerated. It's gonna be super fast, instant loading. So this is just a close-up of the logo. You see the little tiny icon there. So if you didn't know what it was, now you do. Please spread the word. A lot of people don't know about it. So why AMP? This is the most important part of why we should introduce a new technology. Why do I want to learn something else? Well, we have so many libraries and so many things already going on and changing every day. Well, did you know that there's something called the bounce rate, and it's the percentage of users that go to your site and abandon your site before any further interaction. And this is a big deal because if your site takes 1 to 3 seconds to load, 32% of your users are just gonna go away. And if it is 1 to 5 seconds, which is just the average site that we see out there, it increases to 90%. And then it just goes bad from there. This is really important to understand because if you are selling something and 90% of your potential customers are going away and you have a conversion rate of 7%, then you are really left with just a tiny amount of market. Just because your site, it could be great, but they are missing out on this. This is important also for international reach. If you go to, I'm from South America. Every time I go there, I have a problem with my mobile phone because all sites, we don't have this amazing 4G LTE or 5G everywhere. So my sites always take 4 or 5 minutes to load, and I'm not lying. So this is really hard depending on the area. So this is important because you could be losing out on market just by doing some tweaks. You'll be able to improve your performance. So in this talk, in this session, you are going to learn about some principles that even if you don't use AMP, if you apply them into your project, I promise you that you're going to be able to make your sites fast, whatever technology you use. But if you use AMP, you'll get all these out of the box on day one. So let's talk more about why AMP. So we have all these frameworks. They are amazing frameworks, and we have libraries. And I don't see AMP as a competitor to these frameworks or as a replacement. I'm not going to tell you, hey, go use Angular, go use AMP instead of Angular. AMP, I see it as a complement, because if you have a page, a landing page that is critical, you need it to load fast, don't build it in Angular, you can build it in AMP, and then you can transition into your mobile, full, rich application that you build with your framework when your customer signs in or already signed up and already had exposure to your project. So it's not a replacement, but there's something here that comes into mind, that we have these amazing package managers. These package managers, they're really good, but as developers, there is a big problem here. We get carried away installing dependencies. And no matter how much you tree shake or how much you optimize, the problem with packages is that you are just opening the door to someone you don't know for your site with code that is not optimized, that is not going to load fast. So that's a big deal. With AMP, you don't have these problems. You don't have to use package managers. So that's already another big win. You can get started in 5 minutes and already learn how to use and get started with AMP. So we have deployed dependencies. This is just an example. It's just handlebars. I don't know if anybody uses it anymore, but this has 22 packages that are dependencies, and this is a big deal. You are including 22 things with a lot of code that could have a lot of things that are affecting your performance. So this is bad. With AMP, you don't have this problem. So this is one of my favorite websites. It's a Colombian news website that I read every day. At this point, when I loaded it, I hadn't even had any interaction with the website. I hadn't even accepted the conditions. And then I just explored my tab there. With the tab, I saw that I had 133 requests. These, when I read the news in Colombia from my mobile phone, it takes me maybe 1 or 2 minutes to be able to get that first site. It's slow. I mean, at least in the area where my family lives. That's a big problem. And on top of that, we have trackers. We have advertising, customer interactions, analytics. And this is the thing. This is a business. They have to make money. As a business, you need to track things that you need to track how your consumers use your site, so then you know how you can make money and monetize on that. With AMP, there's strategies that you can still get those benefits without affecting performance. So let's continue with why AMP. Webpack Gold, we have all these bundlers and extra packages when we're ready to deploy our application. The problem with this is that this is complicated. If you have used Webpack, it's not easy to get started with and start maintaining it for a production-grade application. So this is just an example of the example config file for Webpack, which is very long. This affects developer experience. This is something that we forget about. We forget that as developers, we also need to think about our experience when we are writing our code and maintaining it. But we cannot forget about user experience. So for example, let's say your project manager comes and tells you, hey, you need to build the next big thing. These are some common tasks that if you think about it, these tasks don't have anything to do with the project, with the money maker right there. This is just manage dependencies, configure frameworks, configure libraries, transpile, bundle, tree shake, minify. These things are not even related to the project yet. And all of them have a learning curve and they have a cost because you have to maintain them. With AMP, you won't have to worry about any of this. You can just get started and get going and publish in minutes. So just remember this. UX is important, but developer experience is important as well. You have to think about you, your coworkers, and the future people that will maintain the project you created. It has to be enjoyable, fast to maintain. And your company will love you for that because it will save you time, which is just money at the end of the day, right? So AMP has 3 core components. The first component is AMP.html, which is just HTML, the HTML you already know and love, but this has some restriction used to protect you from doing bad practices and affecting the performance of your site. So remember those 1 to 3 seconds, right? We need to reduce it. It cannot be even a second because it already decreases by 30%. This protects you. So if you look at this, this is just the standard boilerplate that you can get on the ampproject.org. You can copy and paste it and get started. All you need there, if you notice the HTML has a little amp, the same symbol here, that's just to identify that it's an AMP project, and the validator will use it to validate your project, making sure you are meeting the best practices for the highest performance you can get. And this boilerplate includes these styles. So those styles are usually used in 2 lines. So be careful if you format them, because validation with the AMP validator, they use regular expressions. So you don't want to break that, because you will lose some of the performance benefits when validation doesn't pass. Because if your site, even though if you use something that is not valid, it will still run and it will work, but you won't get all the benefits for performance that the AMP project offers. We have some prohibited tags here, and this big one, this first one is a big shocker. You cannot use the script tag. But if you think about this, this makes it even better, because now all you have to worry about is HTML and CSS. You don't have to worry about JavaScript. So now more people can use this technology and can create ultra-fast instant loaded sites without having to worry about all this JavaScript craziness. JavaScript is allowed just to import the library and the extensions that are authorized by the library. Again, if you include some JavaScript, it will run, it will execute, but it won't be a valid AMP site, so you will lose some of the benefits. There's other tags that are not allowed, but some of these tags, for example, the IMG tag, you cannot use it, but you can use the AMP-IMG tag. This IMG tag has some performance improvements for the layout for when you're including images on your site. So we're going to see an example in a little bit about that. So you cannot use iframes, but you can use the AMP iframe component. So all the components have a replacement, or they are fully forbidden, just because performance. If it affects performance, it's not good for AMP. So the next core component we have is the AMPJS. So this core component is just the JS library that you include, and this has all the best practices for fast rendering of your pages. This is just the library you include in your head tag, and you are done with JavaScript. And then if you want to use a special extension, like an external extension that is not part of the core library, you just include that as well. Really simple. And then we have the AMP cache. This one is the most important part for the AMP project, because with this one, if your AMP site is a valid AMP site, you will get all the performance benefits. Your site will load instantly, and I'll tell you more about this in a little bit, but it will help with performance on the server side of things. This has HTTP2, it offers the CDN, it has the built-in validator, and it has the AMP viewer. And the AMP viewer is my favorite part of the AMP cache. And I'm sure you have used it every day also without even thinking about it. So we're going to see it in the next slide. This one, the AMP validator, if you append this hash development equals 1 in any AMP site and run it, and then run it again, so then it takes the hash there, it will run the validator. If you open your console and you check for JavaScript errors, it will show you as JavaScript errors the validations that you are not passing and that are affecting your performance on your site. If not, it will just say validator is successful, validation is successful. So the AMP viewer, this is my favorite one. If you notice here, when I go and open that site, it just loads instantly. And if you have noticed, there's this top bar where you can slide left and right. You probably have seen it in LinkedIn when you open sites or in Google. That's the AMP viewer. So if you use AMP, you get the benefit of this AMP viewer that is serving from the AMP cache. And it has a lot of benefits like the instant loading, because I'm going to show you in a little bit, but this is one of the big benefits. So let's talk now about how AMP is achieving this speed. How is it so fast? I mean, this is the most important part here, because even though if you never use AMP, but you think about these principles and you apply them on your next project, you are going to be able to optimize it and make it as fast as it can be. So let's talk about the critical rendering path. Maybe this is something new for you as well, or maybe you have heard about it. So the critical rendering path, this is just the intermediate steps that the browser has to take to turn those bytes that it receives from the server, your JavaScript, your CSS, your HTML, and the steps that it needs to take to turn that into pixels. So it's just the series of events to do that first paint. That's a critical rendering path. And in AMP, we target this critical rendering path to get that first load. So the goal is optimize the time that it takes to first render our page. So remember that 1 to 3 seconds, we wanna make it just 1 second, so we don't lose any percentage of potential users that will abandon our page. So how do we do this without sacrificing user experience? Let's enter the Rail model. So this is a model that there's a link down there. You can read about it, but this model is just a user-centric framework, well, a user-centric model that divides the user interactions, the user experience into key actions. So we have 4 key actions. We have response, animation, idle, and load. So the AMP project is meeting these goals. These are 4 goals, and your project should as well. So for example, for response, you should process events in under 50 milliseconds so that you can allow your browser or another 50 milliseconds to respond to that interaction. So user input has to be super fast. It has to be responsive. For animation, you have to produce a frame under 10 milliseconds, so then the browser can complete that frame in 6 more milliseconds, and you get 60 milliseconds time, which is a frames per second of 60 seconds, which is really 60 frames per second, which is really smooth. So you can have a smooth animation. That's something you have to keep in mind for performance and user experience. Also idle time, so maximize idle time. For this, you want to just load whatever is visible for the user and then stop there if there is user interaction, response to the user interaction right away under 50 milliseconds, and if not, continue loading the site when the user is not interacting with it. And load, we have to become interactive under 5 seconds. So we do that first paint under 1 second, but we have to become interactive and fully usable under 5. And if you keep this in mind, then you'll get a good user experience that is focused on performance. So what makes AMP fast? Let's explore the principles that AMP applies and that you can apply on your sites to make your sites fast as well. So the first one is lazy loading. So for lazy loading, use the resources that are shown above the fold, use what is visible for the user, that's what is loaded first. If there is anything underneath, like we can see in this animation, it's just not loaded. Like here in Medium, I just scroll down and it's not loaded yet. That's lazy loading. We have also Preconnect. So the Preconnect API, if you're not familiar with it, start using it. Because by establishing an early connection, your browser will perform the DNS lookup, the TCP handshake, the optional TLS negotiation, and by the time you are requesting resources from your server, that is already established, and that's going to increase the speed. In AMP, this is heavily used. How do we use it? We have this Preconnect callback. So if you go under the hood on how AMP works, we have a Preconnect service that receives the URL and it receives the and it receives the layout, and that's how it works. But if you want to go another level deep, so how can you apply it on your own projects? If you're not using AMP, you can just create something like this. This is what the project does. It just creates an element, use the link element, sets the attributes, and appends to the head of your markup. So it's really simple. But by doing this, early connections, you are masking the cost of establishing the connection. So this increases your speed in a lot. The next one is prefetching. So prefetching is when you have your sources, but they are not loaded yet because the user is not seeing them. But by the time the user is ready to see them, then the CPU power is used to fetch those resources. We have also async JavaScript. So this is how you include the JavaScript in the project. This is just the boilerplate there. You include the AMP project library, you include the custom extensions you want to use, and the keyword here is async. Because the JavaScript is loaded asynchronously, then further requests like fonts can start immediately. So this is very important. You can use this also in your projects, and you can take advantage of this async attribute that is supported by modern browsers. So also we have inline styles. This is very important because we don't have to make extra requests to get every style on the page. So if you have inline styles, you can do this through your bundler. You're going to save requests. So for AMP, we have the style AMP custom attribute. There's only one allowed per page. And this really saves requests. So it's really a simple optimization you can start doing today. And there is a catch here. The maximum size for your styles is 50 kilobytes per page. This really helps you because it limits you and it makes you, I mean, it's still a lot, 50 kilobytes, but it really, like, if you go over that, it gets you thinking like maybe you're repeating things you shouldn't be repeating. So a good advice is always explore your styles and make sure that all the rules are applying. If there is scratch, maybe it's a rule that is overridden by something else, so you can start trimming that out. And pre-rendering. So this is part of the instant loading. So how the instant loading is achieved. When you open the AMP viewer and you tap on the first side, like in the animation I had before, and it's just loaded right away, it's really that AMP is, when you search, it's prefetching the first few results, the resources that you're likely to tap. And once you tap them, they're already pre-rendered. So all that is happening with the AMP viewer for the instant loading is just opening the curtain and showing the content. So that's how instant loading is achieved with AMP. If you don't use AMP, I mean, you don't do this, but it is a trick you could pull on your sites. And when the user starts interacting with your site, you can just do pre-rendering and show just what is above the fold, what is visible to the user. So you can start applying this technique as well. For this, take a look at the intersection observer. It's a new API. You can start using it. So intersection observer. And it's just a technique that helps you with pre-rendering. So we have also resource optimization. So for resource optimization, if you notice in this page, the text and everything is loaded right away, but the video, it's the last thing loaded. So if you see there, it took a while to show the YouTube. So it loads right away, paints under a second, then it starts prioritizing what resources are less important, like videos. Also, we have the layout and downloads are decoupled. So for example, the IMG tag. The IMG tag, the AMP IMG component requires you to have a width and height set. And by doing this, you are decoupling the layout from the loads. You don't have to wait until the image downloads to show the page. So in the left, we see that ugly Jumpy Experience because until the images load and things are pushed down, then we are repainting again and we are doing things that are not optimal for the browser. But on the other hand, for AMP, we see that it loads right away. It's not ready, but because you have a set width and height, there's no Jumpy Experience. And this also improves the reflow of your browser. When it has to repaint, it doesn't have to repaint so many times, which is what we're going to talk about next. AMP eliminates layout thrashing. So layout thrashing, this is, well, let's define layout. So layout is the process that your browser does to define the size and the position of your elements. And then it will do all the calculations it needs, and it will paint it on the next frame. But the problem with this is like every time you add something to the DOM, you are forcing reflow, you are forcing a paint, and all these calculations have to happen again. And this is very expensive, especially if you have low-end fonts and you're using a mobile site. So with AMP, this eliminates layout thrashing. And this is something you can apply on your projects. Here we have a bad practice. We are reading and writing. So we are reading and writing on the DOM, and every interaction is forcing the layout to be repainted. The good way to do it is first do the reads, then do the writes. This is optimal. So in AMP, this is done through DOM change batching. So this is just a technique that it's easy, it's just reads and writes after, but for you to apply them on your project, check the library fastDOM. So that's what inspired the way AMP implements it. And all it does is just, it queues the writes, it queues the reads, it executes all of them in the next frame. First the reads, then the writes. So it's just one frame to do all the DOM mutations. So it's just faster than doing it on multiple frames. Good, smooth experience. And if you want to dig deeper on this, you can use the window request animation frame. This is what is used under the hood. So please explore it, and you can start using it. So this is just to render on the next frame, and this will improve your performance as well. So what makes AMP fast? Third-party JavaScript worst practices don't block the main thread. So remember I said that you cannot use JavaScript, but this is the thing, there is a catch. You can use JavaScript libraries if you do it through iframes. To do it through iframes, you have to use the AMP iframe component, and you have to use it through HTTPS, because we have to make sure that the information that is flowing from there is encrypted, is secure for our users. So if you don't do it, you won't have an AMP valid site. You will still render it, but you won't get other benefits like the AMP cache. So in this case, there is a very bad practice here in this library. We have document.write, and it's writing a script. The problem with this script is that as soon as it is written on the document, it will start loading the source, but then until that source isn't fetched, it won't continue rendering the page. So this is terrible for performance. So this is something for you to check with the libraries you're using on your projects if you are not using AMP. Also, we have font downloads are not blocked because we are not making extra requests for styles, and we have all these other optimizations. If you notice here when I open the main AMP project website, the fonts start right away after the site is loaded. So this really is a good optimization because you don't want to block font downloads. It's really ugly, like the experience when you load text and then the text changes around when it's ready, right? So you should think about that for your users. Just improve your performance when you're using external fonts. Also, we have that extensions don't block the page layout. So we have super nice extensions. Let's say you want to do AMP stories. This is experimental still, but if you want to do it, you don't have to go and write it. It's already available for you. It has a nice API. And these, even though these are making extra requests to the external world, they are not blocking the page layout because they are optimized to not do that. Many of those extensions are using iframes under the hood. We have a third-party iframe that we use for some of these extensions. So these won't block the main thread. So you can still be responsive and response to user input under 50 milliseconds. Also, we have the content delivery network. So AMP cache, that's if you don't know or how to manage a CDN, or you know a CDN is expensive with AMP, you don't have to worry about that. But if you're not using AMP and you have your own application, you can use a CDN. So a CDN will just allow your users that are in South America to get their data from South America. So it's gonna reduce that latency, and they're gonna get the content fast. So this is also some benefits you get there with the AMP cache. Very important benefits there. The cache also offers HTTP2. So if we see here the comparison in a slow 3G network, with HTTP2 is rendered almost right away. So HTTP2 is using parallel downloads, and is using some compression for headers and other optimizations, but it's the same backwards compatible protocol. So with this, you get the benefits with the AMP cache. If you're not using AMP, you can use HTTP2 on your projects. You will see the performance benefits right away. You just have to add support in your backend for it, and you'll be good to go as long as the browser supports it. And the last slide here, we have that animations can be GPU accelerated. This is important for your project and for AMP. So for your projects, not all animations are GPU accelerated. Maybe you have noticed that some of your animations are not smooth. For example, if you're animating left or right properties, they are not using the GPU. But if you switch that to translate or to transforms, it's gonna be accelerated by the GPU. So with AMP, all the accelerations that can be, all the animations that can be GPU accelerated, that's the ones that are used. And in your projects, I recommend you start moving away from animating left, right properties, top, and start using transforms and transitions. They look better, and they produce a higher amount of frames per second. Remember, 60 is the goal. And I just want to finish this with if you use AMP or you don't use it, if you apply these principles on your projects, you are going to help build a better web, more accessible and faster for everyone. And that's it.